Okay, Solo Sam in the fucking house. Let's do it. Feel a little funky, something like that today. There's a couple of reasons. Some I can't pinpoint. One thing I can pinpoint is that my family, as in wife and children, departed. So I'm at home with the animals, which is always a little weird because everyone's usually around. And the novelty's worn off. Basically, instantly, you think that a slight reprieve from two kids under the age of 4 would be desirable. And perhaps that's true. But if you like your kids and you like your missus, then you want them around. The reason they've gone away, it's Easter, so they've gone to see family on my wife's side. And I'm here because this is someone I haven't spoken to. We're in the process of selling our place and have been for a little while. And we have an open house on Saturday, so I need to be here in order to help prepare the place. And part of that is that, and one of the major reasons for moving, and this does have something to do with training, is that this place that we have here in northern New South Wales, Australia, is beautiful. And there's so many things that are great about it. I'm looking at a mountain that I've stood on top of across the way there. There's lots of greenery. We've got space from neighbors. There's a creek running through it. It's good, other than this one thing, which is that it requires a lot of maintenance. And that maintenance, given the internal domestic responsibilities are not insignificant as well, the majority of the vast majority of the outside stuff rests on the shoulders of yours truly. And if it were sitting on the ride-on mower for a few hours each week, and that's all it was, that would be one thing. If it was that and fixing things here and there, that would also be another thing. But it's that plus a lot more. It's basically almost impossible to stay on top of without getting outside help. And even if I'm working hard on it, which says 10, 12 hours a week outside tending to the land, it's borderline maintenance, not really. It's sort of the nature of the geography here, or the climate here, is that it's a lot of sun, a lot of rain, and we've got a shitload of palm trees. So grass grows quickly, weeds grow even quicker, and palm trees, of which we have literally thousands, are constantly dropping palm fronds. And it's taken us a little while to realize that despite the upsides of being here, the costs, both financially and in some senses, both due to needing help at times to take care of the place. I have to get guys to come in with brush cutters and to just help me do things that need doing. And then me doing quite a bit outside myself. It's basically a lost day of work a week where I'm outside doing things. And if there were unlimited hours, I'd be happy to do it, but it really is choosing to do something else, which is, it's instead of family, it's instead of training, it's instead of work. And it adversely affects all of those because it's not just a lost time, but working outside is, and I think I could say this with some authority because I know some sense of what physical fatigue feels like. It's pretty draining. Just existing in a big-ish body outside here is taxing, and then moving things around, even at a low intensity, wears on you. And all the time I've had people come here and help, no one has worked a full day. You basically would be working really bloody hard to arrive here at 8 or 9 and then do 8 hours of work. I haven't seen it before. In fact, I've got guys here today and they can work as long as they want to make as much of a dent as they'd like in order to get paid as much as they can. And they won't work a full 8 hours just because the sweat losses are high, and it's surprising. And that is more noticeable when you're bigger. It's also more noticeable when you have to train either before or after it, or the following day or the day before. And so you pick your poison. Do you train and then go and do that stuff, which means you're going to be starting with more fatigue? Or do you do that when it's a bit cooler and then train, which is basically untenable because you're going to compromise the training? So if you train in the morning, then you're basically going to go out and do this in the middle of the day. And having done it over the summer, it's just been shitty. It's fine. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's just not the best use of my time. So long story short, we're selling our place, and I'll be a little vague on the details in terms of timelines and aspirations for where we're going and how we're selling, what the interest is like, because it ain't none of your business. And it's not really what we're going to talk about here, but it is this thing that has been going on, at least as long as I've had the podcast, and it wasn't without some serious thought. It actually makes me think of this thing that I saw today. Okay, I'll just read it to you. There's a famous Japanese proverb that says, if you find yourself on the wrong train, get off at the next station. It doesn't matter if you have to pay a high cost for a new ticket. It doesn't matter if you're embarrassed to have made a mistake. Every price you pay to fix the situation is worth not going the wrong way and to start going the right way. Not having the courage to get off means going to the wrong destination. This, of course, isn't about trains. It's about life. So you get my point here. This wasn't without significant consideration, and it's not as though there wasn't reasons to stay, but we got to a point where moving makes more sense than staying, despite the significant inconvenience of having to move. I think we've been here now 18 months or so, and there's a lot that's likable about where we live, but the place itself, which is also, there's a lot to like, but enough is enough. And now I'm going to move on to other things. So today, talk a little bit about my training. And the context, which I haven't spoken to, is that in the background of all of this is this part-time job that I've effectively had as a property maintenance guy, which has limited my ability to recover and therefore improve, and is something I'm looking forward to being on the other side of. After I talk about my training, I would want to talk a little bit about me as a sports fan, what sports I pay attention to and what sports I do not. Well, I won't even talk about the do nots. It's just basically every other sport. I think if you take a lot of pride in being a sports fan, but you don't make a considerable investment in your own athletic or physical health performance, then you've got to ask backwards at some toddler shit. Not even toddler shit, some adolescent bullshit. If you're a grown man walking around with some other man's name on your back, then you need to get your head checked. But I'll get there. And then I want to talk about kids training and how I think about it and how I'm dealing with it as a father of two. Then I want to answer one question in particular that's related to a story post I made yesterday about walking the walk versus talking the talk. And then I'll wrap it up. So my training, unload, which is basically an impromptu deload last week, which went well. And as I spoke about last week, part of this new phase, in order to unlock performance potential, is to focus on the number on the scale, despite the perils of doing so and the differing viewpoints that comes to that relate to modulating your body composition and your body weight. So anytime I feel like nowadays I speak about a concerted effort to lower the number on the scale, I both have to deal with my own baggage of, I've had experiences in years where if I got on the scale and that number was higher than the day before, it felt like a failure both the day prior and the day to come, which is fucked up. So I don't want to do that. And I also am aware and in support of the idea that there is a point that a person or an athlete in the effort to improve performance lowers their body weight and does it in such a way that they have insufficient energy and insufficient nutrition and lack of potential to recover from the training they're doing, and it's basically a downward shit spiral. And we want to avoid that as well. But for me, where I'm at, it's a necessary evil. Knowing that there's a fair stretch of nutritional restraint ahead of me, I leaned into indulgences last weekend. No, not really crazy, but just I'll eat what I want. And by the time Monday rolls around, I knew I would have to tighten things up, so to speak. And so that's what happened. Monday morning rolled around, and as I got on the scale to get a indication of where things were, I was greeted by the number 109.5 kilograms, which is heavy. Now, not all of that is actual body weight. A lot of it is roughage, there's food sitting in my system. Glycogen, although I should have sufficient glycogen most of the time, but glycogen does hold water, as does inflammation. So a lot of that was fluid. Some of it was roughage. Ultimately, by now, as of today or yesterday, they were both 105. So that's not 4 kilos weight loss. 105 is realistically what I am. And this element of the project will continue until I am at about 100. And that's going to take a little while. So nothing too aggressive. What the changes have basically been is around sessions and during sessions, no change, making sure that I fuel the training and that I fuel the recovery. But the stuff that doesn't positively influence that, I'm talking about treats or snacks or just by the by, I see food. My son is having something and I see it and that's yum. Just easy to gnaw on stuff in the kitchen, in the cupboard, in the pantry, in the fridge that's not for me and not relevant to my aspirations. And what I found that is, if I brush my teeth after dinner, then that keeps me out of trouble, because a lot of the indiscretion will occur after we put the kids to bed, and then I'm eating stuff that's most likely to be the worst foods that I could eat in a given day at the worst time is most likely going to occur in that window. So the thing to avoid is eating it, that stuff after bedtime or after dinner, bedtime for the kids, pre-bedtime for me. And one method to help increase that likelihood is brushing my teeth at the earliest possible point post-dinner. So that's what I've been doing, and things are trending in the right direction. And by trending in the right direction means that this week is a normal / full week of training, although with acknowledgement for my shin and knee being still a little, I don't say banged up, but there's some tenderness, and I need to be mindful of that. I need to train relative to where I am, not relative to where my aspirations are. So this presents as patience. The shin and knee are noticeable, but they're heading in the right direction. And my belief is, as I build volume gradually, and as I gradually lower the number on the scale, thus improving my efficiency and lowering the impact, then we should be able to get over this hump. I have felt a little more tired this week than usual. Can't put my finger on why, because I don't think I was getting an awful lot out of some of the bullshit calories that I was eating, and it doesn't really influence anything about what I'm doing. It's just something that I've noticed is a little bit more arm twist. Not arm twisting is not right. Arm twisting implies that I have to compel myself it's not even that. It's that I'm usually raring to go when it comes to training. And then there's a couple of times this week where it's like, okay, well, like, we've got to get going. And sometimes after a deload, that can happen. Sometimes after a deload, you feel completely recovered and energized and just can't wait to rip in. And I have that too, but I have had that too. But this go around just felt a little sluggish. Today, in fact, today post training, felt like I started to turn the corner. And I love training. So it's not a matter of psychological willingness, it's more the physical aspect of how my body is feeling. And well, then what do you do about it? And this is something that I've had a evolving experience with, because my contention is if you're a elite athlete in an endurance sport particularly, there comes a point where engaging with how you feel on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're in a team sport, and probably the only endurance team sport that I can think of off the top of my head is rowing. If you were to ask yourself, you wake up in the morning, and we had to do this at times because we'd have these daily check-ins, like a diary where you would answer questions and your coach could see it. Now, I would say that one of the shitty elements of it was that we were compelled to fill it out, which is to say we'd be reprimanded if we didn't. But there was also many instances where you'd put information down like, how are you doing? You're like, someone would say, oh, I'm fucking tired. I'm like sick and injured, and this ankle injury is 9 out of 10 on the pain scale. And then that person would go to training and that wouldn't be addressed. So then it renders the collection of that information pretty much fucking useless. And this is just one of the many useful innovations that we demanded that were obligated to comply with as being members of the national team. Participating in stuff like that is not bad at all. Like, everyone's happy to do that stuff as long as it serves a purpose. And the main issue was that if there are two questions oftentimes. One is like, what's your energy like on a scale of 1 to 10? What's your motivation like on a scale of 1 to 10? And I can't remember the scale, but those are the tenor of the questions. And imagine having to answer those questions. How tired are you? So then you need to check in with, well, how tired am I? And like, well, okay, I've been training 6 or 7 days a week for the last decade. And so I'm tired. I'm pretty fucking tired, actually. And then you put that in, you put 2 or 3 or whatever it is, 8, 10, none of it makes a difference to what you have to do that day at all. So you could put, I'm 0 out of 10 in terms of energy. You get to training and then it's just the same training session. So after a while, you get to a point where you realize that how you feel isn't that relevant, especially your fatigue, because it doesn't influence anything. Now, if you're a individual athlete, especially an individual athlete that coaches themselves, you have to become, it's a different skill. And this is one I had to develop post rowing. All of my erg records or powerlifting stuff, that was all self marathon that I've done previously, long distance running that I've done previously, all self-coached. And if you're programming and coaching for yourself and auto-regulating, you need to be able to check in with where you're at to see if any adjustments are necessary. But you also have to acknowledge that some amount of fatigue is part of the process. So it's an indication, but it may or may not mean anything. And that's the skill of coaching and why most people can't coach themselves. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is just to, I guess, share how things were this week, but more importantly, most of the people listening to this are going to have at least a portion of the year where they're coaching themselves. And you need to be able to differentiate for when checking in with yourself matters or not. If you're an athlete in a team sport, probably doesn't. So if you're in a school sport program, maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. It depends. Anyway, I'm waffling here. I want to talk about the sports that I pay attention to from a spectator point of view, because there are plenty of sports that I pay no or just even a very peripheral attention to. And then there's sports that I keep track of. And there's a hierarchy. The number one sport that I pay attention to, so I wouldn't say I'm a fan, because fan just, I don't know, something about that rubs me the wrong way. I've said to my missus that no kids of ours will wear any name on their back that isn't Lock. I think that's important. You rep yourself, you rep your family, you're repping a team, which is just basically a corporation and a brand. Yeah, not for me. MMA, mixed martial arts. Some people know that as the UFC, but UFC is basically a promotion, the main promotion, the sort of the big show in town for the sport of mixed martial arts. And a lot of people just consider it to be too violent to really want to pay attention to. And I respect that. I get it, but I do not align with it. My first exposure to the UFC was on a rowing camp in Penrith, which is where the Sydney Olympic rowing course is, and finding a VHS, which will date this event. I think it was late 2000 or early 2000, maybe 99, 2000, around then, and finding UFC 1 on a VHS. And we got home and put it on, and some of the guys, we watched it as a crew or a squad, whoever was there, and me and a couple of other guys were like, this is fucking awesome. And then there was the rest of everyone was just like, this is just way just crazy violent. Basically, it was, to them, it was like they were watching a gore video or something. To be fair, UFC 1 was particularly violent and quite different from the sport as it is today. The genesis was bringing athletes from different martial arts together in order to see what was the most effective martial art. And it turned out to be jiu-jitsu, mostly because it was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, to be specific. And that was mostly because no one really had the skills at the time to defend the attacks from a skilled jiu-jitsu practitioner, specifically Royce Gracie, who won UFC 1 and I believe UFC 2, despite being one of the smaller competitors. People didn't know whether grappling, or so that would be wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, would be more or less effective than some of the striking martial arts like karate or boxing or taekwondo or kickboxing or Muay Thai. And at the outset, it was jiu-jitsu, because the majority of fights, both in mixed martial arts or in sport, but also street fights, they end up on the ground. Probably the nature of gravity, things want to go down. And if it goes to the ground, then all of a sudden you've got one person that really, really, really knows what they're doing, and one person that at the time did not. Now that's evolved to what it is today, which is mixed martial arts. So it's who puts the package together, who's got a well-rounded skill set with perhaps particular strengths. So, for example, if you have the type of wrestling that doesn't allow you to get taken down, and you've got really good striking so you can knock someone out, that's pretty effective, because you don't need to know how to submit someone if you don't ever need to. You can just kick the shit out of them. And for me, that sport is the sport, because what could be a more significant test of athleticism than putting you and someone your size that's agreed to fight you in a cage, and you're going to fight with the real potential that you get hurt or knocked out or strangled. And this is going to be in front of everyone that you know and cares about you. In terms of putting your balls on the line and aiming for a positive outcome with the potential for really poor outcomes, that's the sport. It's also requires power, strength, endurance, agility, skill, balance. in addition to this real combative element where you're going to get in a fight. So it's at least as athletically challenging as any other sport. Plus, you're in a fight. So for those reasons, I will watch most UFC cards at least. I'll have it on the background on a Sunday when I'm programming for the people I coach. And as the fight card progresses and the fights get more serious, so it tends to be that the more significant major fights occur towards the end of the card. That tends to be ideally as I'm getting towards the tail end of my programming for the week to come. And then I'm paying a little bit more attention to the fights. The sport that I pay the next most attention to is professional cycling. And just to go back to MMA, because some keen beans that like or love MMA may be listening to this and saying, "Oh, who do you like fighting?" I was very happy to see Alexander Volkanovski, Australian former champion, recaptured his champion, so he's now a two-time champion in the UFC. And to watch him recapture his belt last weekend was great. The guy that beat him previously, Ilia Topuria, Spanish Georgian, he's just a really well-rounded fighter with devastating power, and the way he puts the way he utilizes his skill set, I think it's very admirable. I'm a fan of John Jones as a martial artist, not so much as a person. I tend to pay attention to all of the Australian guys that are fighting on main cards, but there's always going to be up-and-comers. There's always going to be storylines. It's a very fulfilling sport. I, at times, have issues with the way the UFC is run, with the way the fighters are compensated, but I'm not the only one, and I can't do anything about that. Professional cycling I have paid attention to it since the Lance Armstrong era. So when Lance came around, early 2000s, I was paying attention when I was at college in the US, and the time difference is a little bit more favorable. I would watch it. It's a bit like cricket or baseball, where because a stage race or even a one-day race takes 4, 5, 6 hours, there's going to be moments of action and then moments where it's a little more restrained. But the difference between cricket and baseball and professional cycling is both the risk and the challenge. So a lot of you would know that there's this point of view that the reason that doping exists and has existed in professional cycling is just because of the physical demands of that sport. And if you've ever ridden a bike for a couple of 100 kilometers, you get some insight into what that might look like to do that against other professionals over some hectic terrain, including legitimate mountains, and then in a stage race to do that for 3 weeks is just crazy. So I like sports where you have to suffer, where you have to prepare, where it's going to be not exactly a life or death experience, but it's going to be exceedingly demanding. And hitting a ball is, to me, less demanding and therefore less interesting. At this point in time in professional cycling, the talent's perhaps never been as great as it is now. So I'm thinking of Tadej Pogacar, Jonas Vingegaard in terms of the Grand Tour cyclists. It's hard to not appreciate what they do. And then Mathieu van der Poel. So watching Mathieu van der Poel and Pogacar over the last few weeks in some of the spring classics is something I've paid attention to. I stayed up for Paris-Roubaix despite the fact that was not, it's kind of a 2-for-1 because the Oxford-Cambridge race was on the same time as Paris-Roubaix. So it justified, this was last weekend, stayed up watching it. So I pay attention to that sport. That's my second most favorable sport. Equal third, we have strongman, the NBA, track and field. I love what Mitchell Hooper is doing in strongman. The fact that he's not the biggest guy, he's the most athletic, but he seems to dominate competition. Of course, Hathor Bjornsson, just an absolute specimen. In NBA, I've loved the prominence of a couple of Australian players this year in particular. So Josh Giddey, who got traded to the Bulls at the start of the season and not under the most positive circumstances. He was considered to be the downside of the trade. So the Chicago fans weren't especially happy to have him. Didn't play great the first half of the season, but the second half of the season, he certainly did. There's things that he's done in games which only a handful of players in the history of the NBA have ever done. Along those lines, Dyson Daniels, another Australian who plays for the Atlanta Hawks, the amount of steals that he gets per game has been higher than anyone in the last 30 years. So I think he averaged 3-point-something steals per game, which no one has done for 30 years. He's a contender for the Defensive Player of the Year. They tend to go nowadays with a big man, so a center that gets a lot of blocks. But some people would argue that he should be in contention. Some people argue that he should be the winner because in that category, steals or even deflections, which is just nuanced. It's another metric for defensive disruption within the sport. He is just so far above the next person in the NBA that is significant. In track and field, it's probably track more than field. I've always been interested. I am a Jakob Ingebrigtsen enthusiast. I watched the reality show with him and his family. I found it on YouTube, ripped from Norwegian television. Interestingly, with Ingebrigtsen, for those of you that don't know, he won the 1500 meters as a 20-year-old in Tokyo, and then won the 5K and got a silver in the 1500 in Paris as a 23-year-old. He's a multi-Olympic medalist. He's not even in his mid-20s. He's approaching in his mid-20s, and he's the mile indoor world record holder. He's going to be going for them. He'll probably get the mile and 1500 meter world records by the time, which are serious world records. I believe Hichem El Guerrouj still holds those by the time he's retired. And the thing that I digress from, the interesting thing is that there's this Norwegian sporting model that's known where kids are encouraged to maintain a breadth of training for as long as possible, basically to the time they leave high school, regardless of if they want to be elite athletes. So a runner does running, but they also do soccer and gymnastics and whatever else for as long as possible. They emphasize fun as opposed to performance. And many people, including myself, would say that this makes a lot of sense. But Jakob Ingebrigtsen is, by most measures, at least in terms of summer sports, Norway is gangbusters at the Winter Olympics. I think that despite the smallness of their population, they win the most medals, at least the most medals per capita by far at the Winter Olympics. But in terms of summer sport, which is more competitive, there's more people doing it. There's certainly more people running 1500 meters than there are slalom skiing or ski jumping for that matter. And he is not a product of that model that the country he's from is known for, because he was basically training as an elite athlete. His two older brothers are both Olympians in middle long distance running, and he was following in their footsteps, but effectively training at a gradated version of an elite distance runner from maybe 10 years old onwards. So he's both a product of Norway, but not a product of the system that it's known for. I pay attention to boxing because it's peripheral to MMA, but is a limited skill set and therefore more limited in appeal. rugby union, rugby league. I played rugby union for 12 years. I'll always be a Wallabies fan. Wallabies are the Australian rugby team for those that aren't aware. And so I'm kind of always emotionally connected to that because at a point in time, I had aspirations to do that with my sporting career rather than rowing. I've had friends, the former teammates that have played for the Wallabies, and I want Australian sport and Australian rugby to do well. But Australian rugby hasn't been doing well the last few years. The domestic competition, at least at a provincial level, has not been very appealing for a while. The sport to watch is not super exciting. The officials, the referees seem to over-involve themselves in the game. The game slows down. It's never been slower and less fun to watch. So given all the things to pay attention to, all the stuff that I want to do in a given week, of that, a small portion is watching sport. And then the sports that I'm talking about have to fight for a sliver within that sliver. So rugby union and rugby league, even though I think rugby league is a better sport to watch, and I'll always watch the State of Origin, which is New South Wales versus Queensland. Everyone from Australia, most likely from New Zealand, knows what I'm talking about. Everyone else will not. But it's very, very passionate, intense, great spectacle, always delivers. Once a year, 3 games, these 2 teams, and the domestic competition is a really high standard, but it's a domestic competition, and rugby league is a limited sport in that there's only so many countries that take it seriously. So Australia does well at it, yeah, but it's not as global as rugby, or certainly not as some of these other sports that I watch. The last sport that I wanted to flag is ultra running, and that's basically distance 50 Ks and beyond. But in particular, I have been enjoying the podcast, and there's a YouTube series based on it's a runner named David Roach and his wife, Dr. Megan Roach. They have a podcast, Swap, which is Some Work, All Play. And it's hard to explain. I would just encourage you to go listen to them, especially if you're a distance running fan, then listen to it. If you're an ultra fan, then I imagine you already are. But there's something refreshing about their positivity. They're also big on science and dissecting studies, or at least offering their viewpoint, and their coaches as well as athletes. So it's a podcast that I've really been enjoying. It comes out on Wednesdays in Australia, and it's always the podcast I probably most look forward to each week at the moment. David was hit by a car a year ago, basically. I think the anniversary was this week because I watched a YouTube video on it this week. And he had these post-concussive symptoms, but despite that, still aimed for the Leadville 100, which is the 100-mile running race in Leadville, Colorado, which is the city with the highest altitude, any city in the United States. So the starting point is really high altitude, and you go up from there. It was a stretch goal for him in terms of he thought everything would need to go perfectly, and then it would still be a stretch goal. And then he got hit by a car on a bike, thrown 100 feet, hit a fence. There's all sorts of fucked up. Had to be on a bike for a while, had to manage his recovery. And then, so this stretch goal became even more of a stretch. He showed up, he won, he broke the course record. And most of the content this year is about him trying to replicate or supersede those performances and how he feels about it. It's a bit what I try to do, which is to share the good with the bad, to be real about what the training process is like and how he feels about it, and has been enjoyable for me. Now, I want to talk about kids training. And when I say kids, I mean my kids. I've and I part of me doesn't want to share this because I want my kids to have a competitive advantage over your kids. But in the spirit of sharing and betterment and everyone being their best version of themselves, I think that you could provide kids, even young kids. Our son is turning 4 in a couple of months, with opportunities to improve their or develop their physicality in an approachable way that isn't, it doesn't have to be so formal that it sucks all the fun out of it, but it also can give them a running start to help develop some of these attributes and just get a sense of what it's like to work hard and to work with your body and to normalize that. So we have a nearly 4-year-old and we have a baby who's nearly turns 1 next month. Let me see, in a month from now. And at this stage, our daughter, who's the baby, she gets to watch all of this. That's where she's at. She's in the absorbing stage. She has been standing up for about the last month. So she's not exactly training yet, but she's getting exposure so that when she's ready, it is going to be the most normal thing in the world. Our son has been training since he was 2. And training is just a non-specific term I'm using to describe a physical practice. And what this might look like for us is he, on occasion, and this is not a conversation about screen time or even my thoughts on it, but say he wants to watch an episode of Bluey or something, but let's call it Bluey because that's not bad. It's not a bad show. It's Australian. It's good. It's good in that I don't think it's going to ruin a child or their attention span, and it's watchable for parents. And there's some really just beautiful episodes. Cricket in particular, despite my reservations about that sport, that episode, I've watched it probably 20 times. It's maybe the best 7 minutes of television ever. I nearly cry every time I watch it. I can even cry just thinking about it. Something to do with, stick-to-itiveness and realized potential that really gets to me. But say he wants to watch an episode of Bluey or whatever. In our household, he has to carry a medicine ball 2 times around the kitchen. And the medicine ball has gotten heavier over time. So I started with a 10-pound and then got a 15, a 20, and now he's on the 25-pound. He weighs about 40 pounds. So you can do the calculations. What's that, 60-ish% of body weight? It doesn't matter. It's requires him to pay attention, to work hard, and he also has to earn a thing that he wants. And it's also developing his capacity, even though he doesn't know that that's exactly what he's doing. We also go to the gym and train, which is a lot of stuff like jumping and climbing. I'll help him do assisted pull-ups. We bang it out really quickly in order for it to maintain his attention span, for it to be fun. But I'm trying to expose him to as much of this stuff as possible. So we're balancing, we're jumping up onto stuff, we're jumping off stuff. He is doing carries. He likes to lift weights. He wants to pick him up and put him over his head if possible. And I'm encouraging of that. And within the last week, he's started jiu-jitsu. Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I don't know why. I guess jiu-jitsu is a Japanese sport. Brazilian jiu-jitsu, BJJ, is this. The foundation was Japanese jiu-jitsu, and then they developed it into their own thing, which is mostly the jiu-jitsu that is practiced in mixed martial arts. But there's a lot of shared techniques. So I'll say BJJ. He started within the last week. It's a class for 4 to 8-year-olds, and he's 4 in a couple of months. So he's the youngest and smallest in the class. And I was curious as to how he would go, but also how I would respond to watching him in a competitive environment, how would I feel? How would I respond? How would I provide support without it being onerous and sucking the fun out of it? And so that's been my challenge. I have to listen to him about what he's telling me, but only so much. And the reason I know this is when he got a scooter, not a razor scooter, but not a razor scooter. So like a two wheels at the front, the sort of scooter that they give. He must have been 1.5, 2, and was kind of reluctant to use it. And so there was a bit of like, oh, come on, mate, like give it a crack. And then he did, and it was great and was fully competent. And then we got him a balance bike. And to begin with, he was not great and didn't want to do it. So it's like, hey, man, how about you try a balance bike? Because you've got this new balance bike and you know that this is a path that you want him to go down. But he was reluctant. Like, I don't want to do it because he knows he can do the scooter. So like, come on, mate, let's get on the bike. And then he got great at the balance bike, super competent to the point where he's not even thinking about it, just whizzing around. But knowing that that's the case, and you knowing that the balance bike is not the end point. So then for his 3rd birthday last year, I got him a pedal bike, no training wheels, just a little BMX bike. And that was for his 3rd birthday. But I thought that it would be a better gift to not only give him a bike, but to teach him how to ride it by the time he was 3. So at about 2 years and 10 months, we started riding his big boy bike. And he wasn't into that either. Because he had no sense of what to do with the pedals, even though he had a really great sense of how to balance a bike and how to steer it. But the pedaling added this, and especially the braking, because you don't really, for a bike that size, want anything more than a pedal brake. So you put backwards pressure, that's going to brake. That's a challenging concept for a not yet 3-year-old. But we went out every morning, every night for a couple of weeks, and then bingo bango, he could ride a bike. There was tears, not tears from pain, but tears like from falling off, although that happened too, but just tears from reluctance. So now when he says, oh, I don't want to go to jiu-jitsu, instead of just, I don't go, well, mate, your feelings don't matter. And nor do I go, well, okay, we're not going to go. I pay attention to what he's saying, but also how he's acting and reacting. So he'll say he doesn't want to go. And then I'll say, is that because, do you feel a little uncomfortable, a little unsure or nervous about what's happening? You'd be like, yeah, I feel nervous. And I said, well, mate, that's totally normal. You're not supposed to know how to do all of it or even any of it at this stage. You're the newest in the class, you're the youngest in the class, you're the smallest in the class. So just give yourself a little bit of time. And the next thing you know, you're going to be strangling these kids. And we have to go through some version of that and I want you to imagine that this is a conversation that's done in a way that makes sense for a kid of his age. But he also is smiling. He runs in there. We walk there from his daycare, and as he gets closer, he starts running in. And then the whole time he's in there, he's smiling. And so if I pay attention to his actions, to all the visual cues, this is where he wants to be. He's having a good time, and I know that this is good for him. But if I listen to him, then the opposite would be true. So you have to, and he's my oldest kid. He's not quite 4, so I don't even have 4 years of parenting experience. Some of you are probably listening, you got teenagers or 10-year-olds, and you're like, this guy doesn't know shit about parenting. But what I can tell you is that when the rubber meets the road, he is going to be capable. He is training, has been training. And I think parents can both, they should train in front of their kids and expose their kids to training. I'm using training as this phrase as, obviously in the name of the podcast, but it's more physicality or physical culture, because some of it has some sense of progression over time. Like, for example, if he's doing assisted pull-ups at the moment, eventually I'll have him doing eccentric only, and then eventually pull-ups. There is a way to progress this, but some of the balancing and jumping stuff, it's just about exposure. And I do it with him because I spoke to Erwan Lacour this week about MoveNat, which is moving in natural ways, in natural environments. So, jumping, crawling, balance. So that's a lot of the stuff I've mentioned. It's a use it or lose it thing for adults too. So we do a lot of that stuff together, but then there's also times where I take him to watch his mum train, or we'll go to the gym and he'll be training in some sense, and it doesn't require a lot of equipment. But if you're thinking of buying your kids stuff to enrich their lives, you could buy more toys and shit, and that's fine. But you could also just buy little soft dumbbells, maybe the latex covered stuff. And if you have this stuff laying around amongst their toys, you might be surprised the extent to which they just want to pick it up because it's there. They have an energy to move their bodies, and this is a very low barrier of entry to get started on training. So you don't need to wait till they're 12 or 13 or 15 or like a fucking adult to try and by then that's it, that ship is sailed. In terms of your influence, it'll be up to them, but you can normalize this stuff very early on. So the things that we want to normalize is you just because something's hard doesn't mean you stop doing it. Good manners are important. Focus, listening, being respectful, and training. All of that stuff is going to be so normal that they never even consider that there's another way. They'll be teenagers by the time they know that people don't train. There was a post I made yesterday, and for those that didn't see it, I will bring you up to speed because there was a question that I got. I don't even think it was for the podcast, but it's a decent question and it gives me a chance to elaborate on my point. So the thing I said is, personally, if someone doesn't practice what they preach, it renders what they preach is basically irrelevant. For example, if you're an expert in strength and conditioning, but are not actively engaged in the process of improving your strength and or conditioning, I don't give a fuck what your opinions are. There's all sorts of people online giving advice about this or that who are actually shithouse in the realm that they speak of. You may be able to trick those that do not know any better, but I'm going to judge you by my criteria, which is what happens when the rubber meets the road. It's the second time I've said that. It's your job to determine your criteria, but I reckon it should be more to do with what someone does over what someone says. And then I follow that up with, if someone followed you around for a week, would they say your actions reflect the things you advocate? Or B, would it diminish the authenticity of your public persona? Don't just talk about it, be about it. Okay. So you get where I'm coming from. This is the question I got. Hey, Sam, curious about how this stacks up in a coaching setting. What has your experience been like with coaches, both in rowing, but also strength and conditioning / any other domains you've been involved in? What does walking the walk look like for you when you see coaches that you respect? I ask, given that naturally most coaches in rowing at the elite level aren't actively doing the sport themselves at that time, but are taking the experience as their expertise. Is walking the walk based more on the consistency of messaging / going back to their experience at their level and continuing to maintain a certain standard? Always enjoy the content. Cheers. That was from a fellow named Jack. Thanks for the question, Jack. Okay, so it does depend, and I love this inquiry. There is a bit of a difference between the domain in which people are providing advice. So he's asking about, well, what does this look like for a rowing coach? Because they can't be necessarily rowing, and certainly not an elite standard whilst coaching it. Well, not for the most part. And that's true. There are differences here. I'd have to think about this with more detail, but I can't think of a person that I was coached by in rowing that was better at the sport than I was. And given that I wasn't the best guy in a lot of especially not the national team level, there were guys that were at least as good as me or better than me. So the coaches we had were themselves oarsmen of a lower standard than we were. And yet that didn't make it hard for me or them to listen to their advice. But what I would expect from a coach, and I'm thinking rowing coach, track and field coach, rugby coach, any coach where their ability to access the sport personally is limited, both in terms of the time that's available in a day and just access to equipment, all of those things. A matter of priorities. So you can't, it's very tricky to prioritize being an elite athlete whilst coaching elite athletes. Not impossible, easier in some sports than others, but not easy. I would expect that those coaches, that the way that they could be about it and not talk about it is to be students of the sport. So if you're coaching me, you better know fucking everything about the thing that we're talking about. You better know more about the sport than me. You better be at least as enthusiastic as I am, or it's going to be real hard for me to respect you. And this was the case at times, I felt like, with coaches, that they would show up to training and coach, and in the time that they're there, they're serious and they're doing their best, and so are we, and great. But then that ends, and then they go home and they're a civilian, right? They take off their coach's hat and they're not a coach in those moments. Whereas an athlete goes and they're still an athlete. Not only are they still in the body of an athlete, but they still need to keep making decisions that are towards their best interests. And they need to eat properly and be organized and get to bed on time and make good decisions and all that stuff. And the coach may not need to do those things. They may decide not to do their version of those things. And to me, that would be the hypocrisy that I'm speaking to here. Be a student of the sport, even if you're coaching it. They should be, I think if you're an athlete, you want to increase your knowledge base so that you have more reference for what you're trying to do and how to get better. And I think a coach, especially if that's their profession, then what the fuck, man? Like, what is the excuse to not make that a priority? And a deficiency there is exactly the issue that I have. Where it's even more overt is in some of the support staff. So I'm thinking strength and conditioning, nutritionists, physiotherapists, physiologists, and psychologists. If you're a strength and conditioning coach, you're not traveling to Europe for months at a time, usually. And if you are, you're not coaching all day at home or internationally. You're coaching squads in chunks, and then they're going to go and do their main sport. Because if you're a strength and conditioning coach, strength and conditioning is an element of the broader sport. So if it's rowing, it's just one thing that rowers do in a given week. So an S&C coach for rowing, they've got space in the day. And if you are advocating for doing this, and this in the gym, and you're not lifting weights seriously and look like you do, then I'm not going to, it's not that I'm deciding not to respect you. It's just that I can't, because how could I take it more seriously than you when it's your fucking job? How would that be possible? Along those lines, a nutritionist, you better have a fucking dialed diet. Okay. If you don't, if you just decide that you're going to have this balance, that means you can eat all sorts of flim flam, or you've never had to dial it in and you don't have a body that reflects it, means that you haven't experienced what it's like to either force yourself to eat more because you need to add size, or force yourself to eat less in order to modulate your body composition. If you haven't had those experiences, then you can't understand the people that you're providing a service to, especially if you're the one that's telling them what to do. Physios, because they're trying to fix people, is not a perfect, but I think they should take care of themselves. I think they should be involved in a physical practice so they know what it feels like to feel beat up. Physiologists should be interested in seeing what they can do with their own physiology. Physiologists tend to be a bit better with this. I had more physiologists, or at least recreational athletes. Psychologists, pretty pathetic oftentimes. Like you're not like they don't have any of the, they haven't been in a situation for the most part where there is expectations on performance. A lot of these people come from these academic backgrounds, and I'm not anti-academics. I spent a lot of time working with PhDs and people of that ilk, but it's siloed and oftentimes separate from elite sport, which is what these people are attempting to support. So, for example, I would be unqualified by the official requirements to be a strength and conditioning coach for the Australian rowing team, despite being personally stronger and having more experience with S&C than most of those coaches, despite being involved rowing in, I don't need to just go through my experience and accomplishments, but because I didn't go through this funnel of academia to get to my strength and conditioning knowledge, even though I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist, it's not, I don't have a degree in exercise science or physiology, and therefore they want you to have an S&C level 1 and 2 usually, and a degree in exercise science. And if you don't have that, they don't think that you can strength coach athletes at a national level. But they do think that people that have done that have never, outside of those academic environments, have nothing to do with elite sport, they think those people are more qualified. And some of them will be very good at their job, but some of them absolutely are not, couldn't pull the skin off a custard, are some of the least impressive people you'd ever come across. The big ticket item that most of you will engage with on a day-to-day basis is the influencers, because that's the thing that's most accessible. So they've got these people that they can say, oh, you should do this and that, despite the fact that they're not doing this and that. You see people nowadays that go, oh, well, you should be taking, I saw a guy the other day. It was like, oh, I was taking 5 grams of creatine a day, and now I'm taking 10, and I notice all the difference. You notice the difference. I've been taking creatine since 1999, and the people that have for that long, they realize the lack of novelty, and therefore they're not going to advocate for it publicly because they believe that this is something that's well understood by anyone that would be interested in that. So the fact that that's what they're talking about, and then the person goes, oh yeah, great, the ass falls out of it, at least for me. And that might just be because of my position, but I would encourage you to be very wary of where you get your advice from and the criteria you have for the people who you listen to. Do they follow the advice that they give? Would you respect them if you were just to have a conversation sitting next to them on a plane? It might mean that you have a different frame with which to view the stuff that you're being told. If you're an athlete and you have a coach, you might not have an awful lot of choice in doing what they say, even if you have a viewpoint on how you feel. But when it comes to the information that you imbibe, that's up to you. Okay, just to wrap it up, there's something if you're still here and you're still listening, then you're sort of the person that is on board with me and the stuff that I put out there. And this isn't off the back of anything when I announced my goals to lift over 300 kilos, deadlift over 300 kilos and run under 3-hour marathon, same day, same weekend, to be determined. I got some initial feedback that was like, oh, you need to be at least 92 kilos or 85 kilos to be able to run that fast. And people pointing out that that they were skeptical of my ability to do the thing that I said that I would do. That's fine. I don't give a shit about any of that. What I care about is what I think about. And I've spent 10 months training for this goal, and there's been at least as many hiccups as there has been forward progress. There's been plenty of reason for me to be skeptical of my own potential, because the rate of progress has not been as expected. And you may have some version of this where you have a thing that you're aiming for and you're not moving towards it in at the speed or in the way that you hoped, and you might be feeling discouraged. And like with the Japanese train thing, there may be a point where you need to change your course of action or your aspirations. But there also comes a time where you have to dig your heels in with yourself and say, I'm fucking doing this no matter what. And that's where I'm at. It's until the wheels fall off. I will keep adjusting and evolving and taking the steps that I need to in order to get closer to these goals, because I said I was going to do a thing. And I think if you say you're going to do a thing, then it's your integrity to do your absolute damnedest to do that thing. And so that's where I'm at. There are days where it feels further away than others, and I look forward to the point. I hope it's near where it feels like it's getting closer. And because I'll keep showing up, those days will come, and I won't get discouraged. I feel, as of right now, at least as resolute as I ever have been. And this is basically the mindset that got me to the Olympic Games. I decided that I would be going to the Olympic Games. I didn't wait until someone picked me or told me that it was going to happen or it was a good idea or achievable, any of that shit. I remember in 2004 looking at the guys on the US national team in the men's eight that won gold. And I remember knowing some of them and thinking that seems achievable. And up until that point, I'd been thinking, I'd like to go to the Olympic Games, but I don't know what sport. And at that point in time, I said, I'm going to Beijing. I told my parents, graduating in 2006, just so you know, I'm going to be rowing. This is what I'm going to be doing. Not this is what I'm hoping to do, but this is what I'm doing. And then it was doing whatever needed to be done to make that happen. The goal by the time you get there is not about going, but I had to believe that going was possible before I could have aspirations about what we do when we got there. And this is a different point in time, different point in life. There's more people impacted by my performance aspirations, but my family support me. I believe it's possible despite some disruptions along the way. But stay tuned because we are getting after it. So thank you for listening. Submit questions for next week, and I'll catch you then.